Made in Germany is dying the collapse of an industrial myth. The world trusts German engineering, but Germany's vaunted economic model is in terminal decline, quietly unraveling under the weight of self-inflicted wounds. The Made in Germany myth is collapsing under four fatal structural flaws. We expose the guaranteed demise of Europe's economic powerhouse. For decades, Germany has stood as the unchallenged industrial engine of Europe, exporting high-value goods and driving the continent's economic stability. However, this image, the industrial myth, is rapidly failing. Germany is now trapped in a structural recession, a consequence not of global slowdowns, but of four interwoven, self-imposed crises that have destroyed its competitive edge. The foundation of the collapse is the crippling energy shock and industrial policy failure. Germany's rapid, politically motivated exit from nuclear power and over-reliance on Russian gas made its manufacturing base acutely vulnerable, resulting in structurally high energy prices that crush profitability and drive industrial production out of the country, deindustrialization. Compounding this is bureaucratic paralysis and regulatory inertia, where complex planning laws, slow digitalization, and excessive red tape choke off investment and stifle the agility necessary to compete with China and the U.S. Crucially, the demographic time bomb, an aging population, and chronic underinvestment in digital infrastructure and R&D lock the nation into a low-growth, low-productivity trajectory. The very model designed for success in the 20th century heavy industry, reliance on cheap energy, and bureaucratic precision, is now a fatal liability. For the investor, Germany represents a clear headwind, signaling the terminal decline of the Eurozone's anchor. We will dissect the four fatal flaws confirming the collapse of the German industrial engine. To gain the ultimate advantage from this looming crisis, stick around and make sure you subscribe to Secret Wealth Tactics. The foundation of the German economic myth, the renowned Made in Germany industrial model based on excellence in manufacturing, high-value exports, and global competitiveness, has been catastrophically compromised by the crippling energy shock and industrial policy failure. This is the single most acute and defining structural vulnerability that has pushed Germany into a period of stagnation and threatens the permanent dismantling of its industrial base. This shock is unique because it is largely self-imposed, the result of a political consensus that aggressively decoupled the nation from both nuclear power and reliable, low-cost Russian natural gas, thereby sacrificing economic logic for ideological and geopolitical goals. The financial reality is devastating. Germany's manufacturing sector, the powerhouse of the Eurozone, now operates with structurally higher energy costs than its primary global competitors, the U.S., China, and non-EU Europe. This massive and enduring cost differential directly destroys profitability, renders essential industries uncompetitive, and triggers the irreversible process of industrial base moving production overseas, deindustrialization. The genesis of the self-inflicted wound. The current crisis is the culmination of 2 decades of flawed energy policy decisions that prioritized rapid environmental transition and geopolitical dependency over energy security, economic stability. The Energiewende, energy transition, and nuclear exit. Following the Fukushima incident in 2011, Germany committed to a politically driven, rapid phase-out of its nuclear power fleet. Nuclear energy provided stable, low-carbon, and highly reliable baseload power. Its premature closure eliminated a crucial pillar of energy security and stability. Over-reliance on Russian gas. To fill the massive baseload gap left by the nuclear exit, and to bridge the intermittency of renewables, Germany became structurally dependent on cheap, high-volume pipeline natural gas supplied by Russia. This was a deliberate policy choice, championed for decades, which provided a massive competitive advantage, cheap energy, but created a profound geopolitical risk. The failure occurred when these two policy pillars collapsed simultaneously. The domestic nuclear capacity was gone, and the Russian gas supply was weaponized and cut off following the 2022 conflict escalation. This left the world's most energy-intensive manufacturing economy exposed to the volatile, expensive, and insecure global liquefied natural gas (LNG) market. The destruction of industrial profitability. The switch from cheap Russian pipeline gas and stable nuclear power to expensive, spot market LNG and intermittent renewables has generated a permanent, massive hike in industrial energy prices. This cost differential is the financial bullet to the heart of German manufacturing, cost differential. German industrial gas and electricity prices are now several times higher than those faced by competitors in the United States, which benefits from abundant, cheap domestic shale gas, and often double those in key Asian manufacturing hubs, crushing margins for energy-intensive sectors. For foundational sectors, chemicals, metals, glass, ceramics, and fertilizers, energy is not merely an operating cost. It is a fundamental input, often constituting $20, -50% of the total cost of production. When energy costs spike and remain structurally high, profitability is wiped out overnight. These industries, which form the base layer of the entire German manufacturing supply chain, become financially non-viable within Germany. The Mittelstand at risk. The backbone of the German economy is its Mittelstand, the small and medium-sized, often family-owned, specialized engineering firms. These firms are less able to absorb massive, sustained energy cost increases than global conglomerates and are now facing an existential threat, forced to choose between immediate closure or relocation. The irreversible process of deindustrialization. The sustained, uncompetitive energy pricing is directly triggering the irreversible process of deindustrialization, the physical migration of industrial production out of Germany. This is not temporary capital flight, it is a structural dismantling of the productive base, permanent closures and capacity reduction. Companies in the chemical sector, for example, have announced permanent closure of energy-intensive production lines in Germany, stating clearly that the investment for future capacity will be located elsewhere, specifically in the U.S. Attracted by the Inflation Reduction Act's subsidies and cheap energy, or in low-cost Asian markets. Investment decisions diverted. Global and domestic firms are now systematically choosing to locate all new capital investment, capital expenditure, outside of Germany. This means the country is not only losing existing capacity, but is failing to capture the manufacturing growth of the future. While Germany may retain its corporate headquarters and R&D facilities for a time, the high-volume supply chain critical production is moving, taking skilled jobs and local demand with it. Erosion of the cluster effect. German manufacturing thrived on a dense, interconnected industrial cluster effect, a web of suppliers, specialized engineering firms, and R&D institutions feeding into major assemblers, like automotive. As foundational chemical or metal production moves out due to energy costs, the entire cluster becomes less efficient and more vulnerable, accelerating the exit of even less energy-intensive manufacturers who rely on those local supply chains. The geopolitical and financial irony. The crippling energy shock is steeped in geopolitical irony, leading to a profound strategic failure. Subsidizing competitors. By forcing its own energy costs to be the highest in the developed world, Germany is effectively subsidizing its primary competitors. German companies are now building new factories in the United States, thereby investing German capital, technology, and jobs into the American economy, directly boosting U.S. industrial capacity and financial strength. Loss of sovereignty. Germany's high dependence on volatile LNG imports primarily from the U.S. and Qatar has replaced one geopolitical dependency, Russia, with another, global LNG market, while simultaneously destroying the structural energy cost advantage that powered its economy for decades. The feedback loop to stagnation. The dismantling of the industrial base creates a devastating financial feedback loop that reinforces the other structural flaws in the German model. Shrinking tax base. The departure of profitable, high-output industrial firms erodes the corporate tax base, putting immense strain on public finances and contributing to future fiscal instability. Compromising the social model. Manufacturing jobs are traditionally high-wage, skilled positions that form the backbone of the German social security system. The loss of these jobs destabilizes social security contributions, placing greater pressure on the demographic time bomb, Part 3, and the fiscal ruin of the pension system, as analyzed in the European model. Sustained inflationary pressure. The high cost of energy is not a one-time event. It is now a structural cost component that feeds into the price of nearly every product manufactured in Germany, contributing to persistent, cost-push inflation within the Eurozone, which the European Central Bank, ECB, cannot easily solve without crushing the remaining industrial activity. The crippling energy shock is the definitive event marking the collapse of the German industrial myth. It is the self-inflicted wound that has destroyed the foundational competitive advantage of the German economy: reliable, low-cost energy. This failure has triggered the irreversible deindustrialization of the nation, guaranteeing a long-term future defined by structurally high costs, lower national output, and a profound loss of global economic relevance. Bureaucratic paralysis and regulatory inertia. This is the second catastrophic structural failure of the German model, defined by a labyrinthine, outdated administrative system characterized by excessive red tape, painfully slow digitalization, and the relentless choking of investment through regulatory inertia. While German bureaucracy was once synonymous with precision and reliability, today it represents a massive, measurable drag on economic dynamism, acting as a profound deterrent to both domestic and foreign capital, and preventing the swift adaptation necessary to compete in the 21st century global economy. The financial consequence of this paralysis is immense. It introduces immense frictional costs and uncertainty into the investment landscape. For any project, whether building a new factory, laying a high-speed fiber optic cable, or establishing a tech startup, the German state imposes delays so long and processes so complex that the expected return on investment, ROI, is significantly reduced, often forcing capital to migrate to more agile, lower-friction jurisdictions like the Netherlands, the U.S., or parts of Asia. The chokehold of regulatory complexity and delay. The core problem lies in the decentralization of bureaucratic power and the layering of regulatory requirements across federal, state, lender, and local levels. This structure, designed for stability, is now optimized for obstruction. 1. Planning permission nightmare, the Planfeststellungsverfahren. The most visible sign of paralysis is the excruciatingly slow process of obtaining planning and construction permits. This bureaucratic chokehold affects everything from infrastructure to industrial expansion. Infrastructure bottlenecks. Projects of national economic importance, such as building new power transmission lines, installing LNG terminals before emergency measures intervened, or laying high-speed rail tracks, routinely take a decade or more for approval. This delay severely exacerbates the chronic underinvestment problem, Part 4, and prevents the quick build-out of the resilient energy and digital infrastructure needed to counteract the energy crisis, Part I. Industrial deferral. Industrial companies wishing to expand production capacity or construct new modern facilities face multi-year approval processes. In a rapidly evolving global market, a multi-year delay is often equivalent to a veto, compelling international firms to locate their facilities elsewhere. This process directly fuels the deindustrialization trend, as German firms recognize that building a new factory in the U.S. or China can be accomplished in a fraction of the time required at home. The sheer duration and legal complexity of the approval process introduce massive cost overruns and regulatory risk to any capital project, directly undermining the competitiveness of German industry. 2. The legal veto and environmental complexity. German planning processes grant numerous legal avenues for private citizens, environmental groups, and local authorities to challenge and delay projects, often for purely local amenity concerns, the NIMBY effect, or bureaucratic adherence to narrow rules. Litigation risk. Every large project faces a high risk of prolonged litigation in administrative courts. The high probability of legal challenge necessitates extensive pre-planning documentation and risk mitigation, consuming vast amounts of corporate capital and time. This legal complexity is a barrier to entry for smaller firms and a deterrent for large foreign investment. Environmental overlap. Complex and often overlapping environmental impact assessment requirements, while fundamentally necessary, are applied with a rigidity and depth that can paralyze essential infrastructure projects, such as offshore wind transmission cables or battery factory construction, preventing Germany from rapidly executing the Energiewende, Part I, in a timely manner. The digitalization failure. The cost of paperwork. While German engineering is cutting edge, its public administration operates largely on a 20th century model, defined by paper, stamps, and manual processing, a massive failure of digitalization that imposes profound economic costs. Lagging e-government. Germany consistently ranks poorly among EU nations for the provision of basic e-government services. Businesses and citizens are still required to manage vital processes from registering a business to applying for a public grant through physical paperwork, in-person appointments, and often redundant procedures. This lack of digitization is a massive productivity sink for the entire economy. Health and education inertia. The failure to digitize extends to critical public sectors. The healthcare system lags severely in the adoption of electronic patient records and integrated digital health services, impeding efficiency and wasting resources, a form of public sector paralysis. Schools still heavily rely on physical infrastructure and outdated IT, failing to adequately prepare the next generation of workers with essential digital skills, reinforcing the skills deficit of Part 4. Hidden costs for SMEs. For the middle stand, dealing with the bureaucracy represents a significant hidden compliance cost. Instead of focusing capital and human resources on R&D or export expansion, valuable skilled time is spent on manual administrative compliance, reducing their effective profitability and increasing the internal friction of growth. The structural inertia trap. The bureaucratic paralysis has created a self-reinforcing inertia trap that makes reform agonizingly slow, even when the economic necessity is undeniable. Federalism and complexity. The highly decentralized nature of German federalism, the sharing of power between the federal government and 16 Ländersender, means that digitalization standards, planning laws, and administrative procedures vary widely and require complex coordination, slowing down any national reform initiative. Efforts to standardize and simplify often become bogged down in political squabbling between the states. Risk aversion and status quo bias. German public administration often operates with an extreme degree of risk aversion, prioritizing the avoidance of legal error or public dispute over the speed and efficiency of service delivery. This powerful institutional bias ensures that the cumbersome status quo is maintained, as any change is viewed as introducing potential risk. The political and social cost. The result is a society where it is easier to maintain the existing massive bureaucratic structure than to reform it. This inertia is now so profound that it structurally prevents the swift policy execution required to address the crippling energy shock, Part I, and the demographic time bomb, Part 3, ensuring that Germany remains slow-footed in the face of global, fast-moving competition. Bureaucratic paralysis and regulatory inertia represent the systemic failure of German governance to adapt to the demands of the modern economy. By imposing immense frictional costs, chronic delays, and profound uncertainty on investment and infrastructure projects, this paralysis is actively destroying the agility and competitive advantage of German industry. It is the structural chokehold that prevents the private sector from innovating and investing its way out of the high-cost environment, guaranteeing that the collapse of the German industrial myth will be prolonged and permanent. Thanks for watching. Demographic time bomb. The structural vulnerabilities crippling the German economy. The cost shock of crippling energy shock, Part I, and the inertia of bureaucratic paralysis, Part 2, are underpinned by a far more big-different, profound, and irreversible crisis. The demographic time bomb. This is the third catastrophic structural failure of the German model, defined by a rapidly aging workforce, a shrinking native labor pool, and the mathematical certainty of permanently constrained economic growth. This demographic reality guarantees a future of structural low growth and exacerbates every existing fiscal and economic rigidity, ensuring that Germany cannot grow its way out of its current economic stagnation. The German demographic structure is one of the oldest in the world. Its fertility rate has been consistently below the replacement level of 2.1 children per woman for decades, and its life expectancy has increased dramatically. This lethal combination means the large post-war generation is now retiring en masse, while the successive generations entering the workforce are significantly smaller. This creates a severe and irreversible inversion of the historical population pyramid, which is the direct engine of future economic stagnation. The collapse of the labor force and dependency ratio. The most immediate and financially disruptive impact of the demographic time bomb is the collapse of the working-age population and the consequent explosion of the dependency ratio, the number of non-workers, children and, crucially, retirees, for every worker. Shrinking labor input. Economic growth is fundamentally driven by labor input and productivity. As the working-age population, 15 to 64, begins its structural decline, Germany's potential GDP growth rate, the maximum rate at which the economy can grow without triggering inflation, is structurally capped at a low level, projected by many experts to approach 0.5% dollar to $1% dollar annually. This is a form of permanent, mathematical stagnation. The dependency burden. The rising ratio of retirees to workers places an unbearable strain on Germany's social security and public finance systems. Like the French model, Germany's generous pension and healthcare systems are largely based on a pay-as-you-go (PAYG) principle. Fewer contributions from a shrinking workforce must fund the exponentially rising pension and healthcare costs of a large, long-lived retired population. This guarantees a relentless, mandatory rise in the total cost of the state. The productivity trap, aging and rigidity. The demographic crisis does not merely shrink the size of the labor force. It profoundly degrades its quality and dynamism, actively contributing to the productivity deficit and reinforcing the low-growth trap. Aging workforce and stagnant dynamism. The median age of the German workforce is steadily increasing. While experienced, older workforces are generally less geographically and occupationally mobile. This lack of mobility is a structural impediment to capital reallocation. The necessary shift of labor from declining, old economy sectors to growing, high-productivity, new economy sectors, for example, software, advanced biotech. This rigidity slows the pace of structural economic change, a failure that prevents the kind of efficiency gains that could offset the shrinking labor pool. Slower technology adoption and innovation. Academic and industry studies suggest that older workforces, particularly in tradition-bound industrial settings, are generally slower to adopt and integrate radical new digital technologies and processes. This slows the crucial technology adoption curve across the massive middle-stand and industrial base, suppressing the necessary productivity leaps required to justify high German wages and offset the crippling energy shock. Part I. Skills shortages in key sectors. The labor scarcity is most acute in critical technical and skilled trade professions, engineering, advanced IT, healthcare, and specialized manufacturing. The educational pipeline of younger workers is insufficient to replace the retiring expertise. This shortage forces companies to delay expansion or automation projects, further capping productivity and making the German economy less responsive to global demand. Exacerbation of fiscal and investment crises. The demographic time bomb acts as a powerful multiplier for Germany's existing structural problems, ensuring they cannot be solved through conventional policy. 1. Locking in high taxes and debt. The guaranteed, exponential rise in mandatory age-related spending, pensions and healthcare, creates an unresolvable structural deficit. This forces the German government to choose between two destructive options, both of which compromise future growth. Massive tax hikes, raising the income, corporate, and social contribution taxes to cover the rising dependency costs, would immediately crush private sector profitability and trigger a flight of capital and skilled labor, exacerbating the productivity and competitiveness deficit. Part 3. Debt spiral. Continuing to fund the deficit through borrowing, as seen in the debt-funded lifestyle analysis of France, accelerates the national debt to GDP ratio. Given Germany's traditional commitment to the Schuldenbremse debt brake, the political fight over funding the demographic costs will paralyze fiscal policy, resulting in chronic, damaging underfunding of discretionary public services and investment. 2. The Great German Investment Diversion, the Grey Drain. The immense cost of the aging population forces a massive, strategic diversion of national capital away from productive, future-oriented investment and towards mandatory consumption, elder care, sacrificing infrastructure and R&D. Public budgets, strained by pension and health obligations, must sacrifice discretionary capital expenditure for infrastructure, digital network expansion, and R&D. This directly reinforces the chronic underinvestment cycle. Part 4, ensuring that the physical and technological foundations of the German economy continue to age and lag, while competitors in the USS and Asia invest heavily in the future. Private capital starvation. Private savings are increasingly channeled into high-liquidity, low-risk instruments for near-term consumption, retirement, rather than into the venture capital and long-term industrial equity needed to fund innovative German startups and the middle-stand's necessary modernization. The limits of policy mitigation. German policymakers have attempted to mitigate the demographic crisis, but the solutions are proving structurally insufficient. Immigration. Germany has pursued significant immigration, particularly of skilled labor. While this provides a temporary offset to labor shortages, it is not a structural solution. The volume of sustained immigration required to stabilize the worker-to-retiree ratio is politically toxic and logistically complex, and new immigrants eventually age and become dependents, merely deferring the crisis by a generation. Raising retirement age. Politically agonizing measures to raise the effective retirement age are being implemented. While necessary, there are practical limits to how long workers can remain productive, especially in physical industrial jobs. Furthermore, the political battles over every small increment of change consume immense political capital and prevent focus on critical supply-side reforms. Chronic underinvestment. This is a self-inflicted wound where Germany, the supposed exemplar of industrial prudence, has systematically starved its essential supply-side capacity, public infrastructure, research and development, R&D, and high-speed digital networks for decades. This systemic failure guarantees that Germany's productivity gains are structurally capped, making it impossible for the economy to generate the wealth necessary to pay for its high social costs and compete effectively against global rivals. The financial logic is that past investment is the necessary seed corn for future growth. By deferring investment, Germany has effectively capped its future potential GDP growth rate. The result is a rapidly aging capital stock, a massive technological lag, and a structural inability to modernize the economy swiftly enough to offset the rising costs and shrinking labor pool imposed by the other three crises. The decades-long starvation of public infrastructure. Germany's reputation for efficiency is increasingly belied by the physical state of its public infrastructure, which has suffered from years of purposeful neglect, often driven by adherence to strict fiscal rules like the Schuldenbremse debt brake. While fiscal prudence is laudable, when it crowds out essential maintenance and modernization, it becomes a severe economic liability. Decaying transport networks. A significant portion of Germany's road network, bridges, and essential inland waterways, critical arteries for its export-driven manufacturing base, is severely aged and requires massive, immediate maintenance. Chronic closures, weight restrictions on bridges, and bottlenecks translate directly into higher logistics costs and longer supply chain delays for German industry. This physical friction acts as an invisible, persistent tax on every exported good, eroding the competitiveness gained through quality engineering. Rail network obsolescence. The state-owned rail network, Deutsche Bahn, suffers from chronic underinvestment in signaling technology and maintenance, leading to perpetual delays and operational inefficiency. For an economy that relies heavily on rail transport for its bulk industrial materials and finished goods, this unreliability increases the effective cost of production and delivery, further damaging profitability already under pressure from energy costs. Part I. The planning investment paradox. The underinvestment problem is inextricably linked to bureaucratic paralysis. Part 2. Even when funding is theoretically available, the paralyzing complexity of the planning and approval process means that project execution is excruciatingly slow. This creates a destructive cycle. Infrastructure decays due to lack of funding, and when funding is found, the bureaucracy prevents it from being spent efficiently, leading to immense cost overruns and years-long delays. The catastrophic digital and R&D lag. The most damaging aspect of chronic underinvestment is the failure to invest in the foundational technologies necessary for a 21st century economy, creating a massive digital and innovation deficit compared to the U.S. and Asian rivals. Fiber optic failure. Despite being the Eurozone's largest economy, Germany lags far behind almost all OECD competitors in the deployment of future-proof, high-speed fiber to the premises, FTTP, broadband. The reliance on older copper-based networks results in slower internet speeds and lower upload capacity, which is a severe handicap for industries reliant on large data transfer, cloud computing, and advanced industrial automation. Industry 4. This failure is a direct structural impediment to national productivity growth. R&D, translation gap. While Germany invests significantly in fundamental research through institutions and universities, the system suffers from a commercialization deficit, insufficient public and private venture capital, and inadequate policy support for technology scaling prevent innovative lab-based concepts from being rapidly translated into scalable industrial products and high-growth startups. This failure to bridge the valley of death means that valuable German intellectual property often migrates to the U.S. or China for commercialization, robbing Germany of future wealth and job creation. Skills and human capital starvation. Underinvestment in the education system's digital infrastructure and the lack of robust, modern vocational training programs, Part 3, fail to equip the workforce with the cutting-edge IT and automation skills needed to operate a highly productive, high-cost economy. This skills deficit prevents German businesses from fully realizing the productivity potential of automation and digital transformation. The productivity ceiling. The cumulative effect of this systemic underinvestment is a structural cap on productivity gains. The German economic model requires continuous, high-level productivity growth to justify its high wages, high taxes, and high energy costs. Chronic underinvestment makes this impossible. Capping output per worker. Workers, even highly skilled ones, are less productive when they are working on outdated machinery, in factories supplied by unreliable power grids, and constrained by slow digital networks. The underinvested infrastructure and technology act as a fixed ceiling on the maximum possible output per hour worked. High cost of transition. The lack of prior investment means that the necessary transition to a climate-neutral, digitized economy is now exponentially more expensive and disruptive. Germany must now attempt to achieve a massive simultaneous technological catch-up in digital and green tech while grappling with the crippling energy shock and a shrinking workforce, a task made nearly impossible by the lack of prior, sustained capital investment. Compromising the middle stand. The middle stand, the bedrock of German innovation, relies on best-in-class infrastructure and a predictable regulatory environment to maintain its global niche leadership. Chronic underinvestment directly attacks their ability to maintain operational excellence, pushing these firms towards emigration or obsolescence. The financial and political inertia. The chronic underinvestment cycle is deeply entrenched by the German political system. Fiscal dogmatism. The political adherence to the Schuldenbremse, debt brake, has often been interpreted as prioritizing zero new debt over necessary capital investment. This fiscal dogmatism sacrifices long-term economic vitality for short-term balance sheet aesthetics. While the rule itself is sound, its rigid application without a structural carve-out for essential productive investment has been economically devastating. Lack of central authority for execution. The decentralization of planning. Part 2. Ensures that even when investment funding is approved at the federal level, the state and local bureaucracies are incapable of spending it quickly or efficiently. This structural incompetence in execution means money often sits unspent, while the physical infrastructure continues to decay. You have now witnessed the 4 critical, self-inflicted wounds destroying the Made in Germany myth. The crippling energy shock, eliminating its cost advantage, the bureaucratic paralysis choking investment, the demographic time bomb shrinking its workforce, and the chronic underinvestment capping its productivity. These are not temporary headwinds, they are permanent structural failures, guaranteeing a prolonged era of stagnation and deindustrialization. Germany, the Eurozone's industrial anchor, is actively destabilizing the currency bloc. This is a clear signal that the capital and production center of gravity is shifting away from Central Europe. If you are positioned heavily in euro-denominated assets, your wealth faces a guaranteed long-term headwind. Do not be the last to exit. Subscribe to Secret Wealth Tactics now and activate those notifications. We will provide the deep dive analysis and actionable strategies needed to protect your wealth from the collapse of the German industrial engine and position your portfolio to profit from the new, globally reallocated production cycles.